an agenda with a sort of ton of material linked into it. I didn't post that because I've been doing that as kind of a working doc for us so we can add notes and then post it after. But I can put that on screen if you want.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I did have a chance to go through I didn't get anything in addition to what's you have there from town council as far as questions. So I let them know that we were meeting today and asked if they did have any specific questions for Wednesday night, that they share those in advance of our meeting today. But I suspect a couple may trickle through over the next couple of days too. But that's at least a good start.
Yeah, I did actually add in some new questions that Colette forwarded to me just like a few minutes ago.
Okay.
I didn't answer them. I just used that doc that I had created earlier. It sounds like Colette is creating a shared doc for town council that has sort of a Q&A going. And so once we're satisfied with what the answers to our questions look like, we can also send those back to her to be folded into that document.
Cool. Okay, so why don't we just go ahead and I'll officially call the school board finance committee meeting for April 26th to order. Anne did just say that she's running over on a work meeting, so we should carry on and she'll join when she can. So I think the goal of this really is just to prepare for the workshop on Wednesday night. I think last year we didn't, you'll have to remind me, last year we didn't do this in the normal sense, but in prior years, I believe the format was that, Sandy, yourself, and like me and Kate would, I think, kind of take the lead and present to them whatever, we want to present that's maybe new or updated. And then otherwise we kind of just turn it over to them for questions. Is that your memory as well, Kate?
Yeah, and of course, different finance committees have different approaches to these things. I did notice in watching the tape of the meetings, the first meeting that they had last week, that each of the departments or most of the departments provided some kind of a little slideshow. Here's where we're at. And I hesitate to put together yet another slideshow because we've done so many different ones. But I think what they'll be interested in, at least I think what they'll be interested in, is what's different now from when we had our first reading. Mm-hmm. And what are we going to be able to do to move the dial on their request to get the budget to a lower number. So I did put a note on this agenda to say, do we need a slideshow? Do we want to, proactively answer questions through a presentation? It's tough to know exactly what the expectation is. I know the idea is to have them have time to ask their questions, but if we know them in advance, could we present that?
I mean, I think that's a good idea, right? I guess that's not, maybe that's an assumption I have, but it could be an incorrect one, and I can validate this with John. But if they're asking the questions, I think we should be prepared to answer them so proactively, and then I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions, right? That we wouldn't have material prepared for.
Yeah, it looked like there was a little bit of overlap in the questions, the new questions that I got, that we might be able to pull a theme out of. And like I said, I just got those, so I haven't really reacted to them. Mm-hmm. But there will be new things that we can share, and we could say, kind of here's what our budget looked like on first reading. We could use the items in motion document to say, here's what's changed. And I took that, I made a new version of that from what we did last year. Last year was obviously a little more complicated, just because of the craziness of the process last year.
Okay.
But
could we talk through just a couple of things on here that I have questions on, and KT, if you have questions on things in here as well, just to make sure we're aligned. Can you just talk through the bullet? Well, let me back up. I think we're pretty clear, I think, on the details of the CARES Act spending as far as like our finance committee. Is that fair, Kristen?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think, you know, maybe Kate, you could just expand on your point around your meeting with Todd on tomorrow to revisit the CIP, sort of what your goals are for that meeting and what you anticipate you might shift around.
Sure. So at one of our board or finance committee meetings around our own budget, one of our conversations was like, okay, what's in CIP right now? Because that could change. So the original goal for CIP was basically to put back all of the things that we deferred last year that we still perceive to be a critical need. But we haven't revisited that in the same way that we revisit all the other elements of the budget. And Todd and I have not been able to connect. We did set up a time for tomorrow. He's been a little busy working on some important things, but I think what he and I had thought we would do would be to take a look at, are there items even in this year's ask that could be deferred again or reduced or you know, taken care of in some other way, which is really the same process that we typically go through between first and second reading. So what I had hoped, I think, if it's okay, I'll pop up this items in motion.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If we want to just go there for a minute. All right, can folks see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is something that we have used in years past, and it's basically, this is the top block is a snapshot of what our first reading budget looked like. This does not include CIP because the school department doesn't assign the funding source for CIP projects. We just put our number out there, our expenditure number out there, and then the town decides, should it be bonded? Should it be appropriated? Should it be something else? And so that's how they determine the tax impact, and we don't really have that, that authority. So one of the pieces around CIP is that the town finance director, Ruth Porter, and I had a conversation last week about the fact that it looked like almost everything on the school CIP list was to be appropriated, meaning to be using tax dollars. And, you know, not that that's a terrible thing, but I felt there were some inconsistencies with what we had done in just last year's CIP budget and years prior. And I know there were rules and policies around debt service, and that the town was trying to follow those as they figured out what should be bonded and what shouldn't. But Ruth herself felt that there was room for further conversation, and that she had planned to talk with the town manager about that piece of it, about the funding piece. So that's one thing that's going to be going on, that there may be things that are listed to be a tax impact that wouldn't necessarily have to be a tax impact next year if they were bonded. And then the second piece is to go through our actual projects and say, are there things that we can defer? And, you know, there are a couple of things in there that Todd and I think we can probably back off on. And again, it would be a question of what's the impact? Is it, you know, is it going to cause problems if we slow down on some of these things, and what's critical and what we can get away without doing? So to go back to this document, this is basically, this is where we are right now, as far as the school board is concerned. And then these are the budget adjustments that we have. I guess you could say that one of them is a decision point. One of them is moving those teacher positions. The very first one's moving those teacher positions from the operating budget into ESSER 2. Oh, it says ESSER 3. Sarah, you gotta help me with this. I can't get my 2s and 3s.
Listen, I was waiting for you to be done, Kate.
Oh my God. Okay, so ESSER 2. I'll fix that. Um, and then the other stuff is really just your normal sort of items in motion. Like we got some information from our insurance agents on work comp, on Anthem, on Delta, all good news there. We got the audit finished with the debt service numbers in it, which is not great news. That's adding back because my debt service number didn't include all the information that it needed to include. Then there's a couple of other bits and pieces that can allow us to take our number down. And I'm sure that that's, really the biggest thing that the Town Council Finance Committee wants to know. What are you bringing to the table that can help us get to our goal? So I don't know how into the weeds we want to go with these things, but, I can certainly speak to the background on each of them. And then the bottom line is we're proposing to reduce our expenditures by $556,000 because of these reasons. And then this apply additional fund balance as non-tax revenue. I actually finished a high-level projection for year end of FY21 over the weekend. And that's part, there's a couple of pages of that information in our financials because I figured that was a good place for that to live. And so we can go back and take a look at that. But the bottom line there is I've already got $700,000 as non-tax revenue in the FY22 budget proposal that we all voted on. That's the same amount that we have in FY21. It's a carryover.
Sorry to interrupt. Diane, I see that Leanne is in as an attendee. Do you mind promoting her? Thank you. Sorry, Kate.
No worries. We want to hear Leanne's voice. So we have $700,000 of fund balance used as non-tax revenue in the original FY22 budget proposal. And of course, one of the questions that's coming up from the council is, what are you going to have for year-end surplus in FY21, and can that help us? And the short answer is yes, I think it can help us. And I think we can throw another $300,000 into that revenue piece. And that I'm very conservative and that I hate to spend fund balance. And it's like, I shake my finger a lot about that. But this is a good time to spend fund balance, right? Because it's an unusual year. We have a lot of areas of savings that we wouldn't have in a normal year. And if we can use those savings in the current year, much as the town did last year when they had curtailments and tried to build fund balance, and we did that to a certain extent ourselves, having that higher level of fund balance in the ensuing year, the only risk that you run is that then that is your revenue going forward. So in FY23, do we have sufficient money to keep that level up? Or do we need to reduce that level and go back down to what would be a more normal level of use of fund balance, which is $300,000, $400,000 generated in a normal, typical year? So being the conservative beast that I am, I figure that we have enough to retain $700,000 for FY23 and also spend $300,000 in FY22. Thoughts about that?
Makes sense to me. I mean, I see where this is going, and I think that it's a significant amount of progress towards getting closer to their goal. I keep trying to scroll down on my screen and realize that
let me get to the bottom line. Sorry.
Yeah, the bottom line is almost $1 million from where we started, and I think. But in general, I think that's a pretty good place to come a couple of weeks out from second reading, and then we'll see what happens with the CIP.
Right. I mean, I feel like the CIP, there is a little bit of low-hanging fruit there. There's some items that I think of, painting. We always have painting money in the budget. And we had a lot of conversation about, well, should you be painting and laying people off? But they're, apples and oranges, whatever. But we still have painting. We still have, we didn't ask for HVAC money because we kind of slowed that project down due to COVID. So we're not asking for new money there. There are some things I wouldn't defer. I wouldn't defer roofing or masonry or some of the things where you're actually going to create a disaster. But there's some smaller projects, and there's also a project in there which I don't know that we had a lot of conversation about, but paving Quentin Drive, which is the road that runs from 114 at the library down to the middle school, and it is kind of falling apart, and it really needs to be done. But again, if this is not the year to do that, then we would probably just do some smaller repairs around that sort of divot that there is in the road that's causing some trouble for vehicles. So again, I think if Todd and I can go through that list again, I think we'd be able to recommend a couple of $100,000 further reduction in CIP. And my goal with this is not to do anything that is drastic, but just to make the kinds of reasonable adjustments that we would normally make between first and second reading, and see where that lands us. And I think the only odd thing that I'm doing, or the only unusual thing that I would be doing, is offering up more fund balance, which I think is also reasonable. But we could conceivably push that number up to $1 million reduction.
So I just had a thought, and I just made myself a note, and I'll reach out to John. I think in previous conversations with him, he had said that the CIP is kind of the last thing that they do. So I'm wondering if they're going to have the expectation that we just focus on the general fund on Wednesday, or if it's worth doing more of a deeper dive into some of the CIP items that you and Todd talk through. So I'll clarify that just so we're prepared, and it may be, if it's the latter, that we need Todd there as well. Otherwise, I think Todd would be off the hook. So let me check with John on that and see what their expectations are, just so we can be prepared.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Sarah, because the other email that I got from Colette this morning was a calendar clarification. She says that the last budget review for the Finance Committee was going to be May 12, which was their CIP debt final adjustments meeting. And that meeting is now going to take place May 19th. So as they pushed out their second reading, they pushed out the referendum 1 week, they're pushing out that last meeting 1 week. And then the May 12th meeting is being repurposed for some other department review conversations, it looks like.
Okay.
They left that joint finance meeting on May 5th?
They did, yeah. It's supposed to be a whole school board, town council workshop. So maybe that's another thing, Sarah, that we should just run by John and see, even if we could carve out what the agenda is for that and what the expectations are for that, because I know that last year, pretty much every council member and every school board member so engaged in listening to the meetings and being a part of what was going on all through the process, that I don't know that we even needed a workshop because all the questions were already out there.
Yeah, I want to reduce the redundancy as much as possible. So good call, KT. I'll ask him about that.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll probably give him a shout after this and just run him through what we're planning to share and make sure that that's what they expect. And if not, I'll circle back to you, Kate.
Yeah, and I think if they would like to see a handful of slides, we certainly have some, we have a lot of things that we've pulled together for different purposes on the school board side, and hopefully town folks have had a chance to take a look at some of those presentations, but we could certainly pull together something. And I think I put some notes on the agenda about what it could include based on what I saw from the meetings that were held last week.
Okay.
All right.
KT and Leanne, do you have any questions on the items in motion?
Can you just explain to me, and I'm sorry because this is just me getting up to speed, but the debt service, how that, like what that's we have no control over that, right? Like that's just,
Yeah, so the debt service payment in any given year is the bill that comes due on financing, basically, for that year. And so it's the payment due on bonds that have been issued in the past. And those can go back, 5, 6, 7 years, and then they accumulate. And so there's a debt service schedule. And unfortunately, this year with the audit being so late, I did not get an accurate number from the town for what debt service was going to be. And I estimated based on prior year, which was dumb because that didn't work. So usually if you read your audit book cover to cover, which I know you do, it's got a page that talks about debt that's coming up in ensuing years because it's a liability for the town. So the audit has to report that, what's owed. And so that's usually where I grab my numbers for as I'm building the budget. And with the audit not being finished until like a couple of weeks ago, that number was way off. So my bad, I should have estimated higher, but it was, it's in a place where we can change it. And luckily with the other reductions that we have to make, thank you, Anthem, it's not actually putting us in a big hole, which it could have done.
thank you.
Is the increase to the Zoom licenses, is that just a cost increase, or are we getting a amped up version?
We got a couple of different features, and I'm not sure I could tell you right off the top of my head what they were. I just know that IT came in and said, oh my God, we need a thing.
Is that shared with the town though?
Yeah.
Just the school department, okay.
Yeah. In the IT budget, Don does a pretty cool job of on his line item budget, which is much more detailed than just the lines that we have in our in Munis. He does a good job of saying, these are school town things, split half and half. These are just school things. And these are just town things. So we have some pretty good detail on that.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, if you look at some of these little things, like the Zoom license is one thing, Odyssey subscription in adult ed is another thing. Those are typically things that we manage through once we have a budget. Like, oh, you know what, this came in more expensive than what we expected. So I guess we're going to need to find some money from someplace else to cover it. It just so happens that because we haven't nailed down our budget numbers yet for next year, that we have the luxury of putting the correct number in there when we have accurate information up front. So, they're little numbers, but I think because we know them today, it's reasonable to put them in there. I also didn't mention using more fund balance for adult ed. I talk about it in the financials, but we've never had more than a couple of $1,000s of fund balance at the end of the year in adult ed. But because adult ed gets $90,000 in tax revenue, this year they didn't spend it. We budgeted for it as if it was going to be a normal year. We reduced it a little bit, but they have that tax revenue and they haven't run as robust a program as they usually would in the COVID environment. So they're going to have money left over.
Good.
So maybe we go back to the.
You want to open up the spreadsheet and just go through the questions that I think it was only John Anderson had added to that you responded to, just so we can all see that and make sure we're comfortable with those responses.
Sorry, hang on. Let me get to a better spot here. Can we see that?
Yep.
All right. So the questions that were sent from John, he gave those, or Colette gave those to us last week, and I just punched in a bunch of info data. And then there are new questions that came in this morning, which I haven't responded to. The one of John's that I didn't write anything in was about the long-range planning. And I figured I would get some help from you guys in terms of how to respond to that question. I know that the number that we selected was based on the work of the building steering committee, but I wasn't really sure how to articulate that.
It was based on an actual RFP. So they had submissions from firms and that. So that was the actual cost plus 3%. Was that what we decided on there? I think it was 3%. I was just trying to find it in my email. But my guess is what he's getting at is just like a random number we came up with, and it's not at all. So it's their total, the total from the proposal plus 3%, but 100,000 of that was in last year's budget. So this is the remainder.
I can write right in here if you think that's a productive use of time here.
And to answer his question, no, I don't think it can be deferred. I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but I think we need to keep moving on this. And that's the plan.
Yeah. Katie, I'm wondering if rather than Kate sort of transcribe what you just said, maybe you want to add some detail in there after the meeting?
When I get home, I can fill it in.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Because I'm already butchering it. I can tell. I'm like, huh, okay. So the other ones, I guess I had the first one, I had a question about the question. Like, I'm not sure what constitutes 750,000 over level services, but I think it has to include the 5 classroom teachers, which we've now removed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where that 750.
I get pretty close to 750 if I don't take out the turnover reductions and I do the ads and the restores. I can get there. So I'm thinking that's what he's asking about. And then, you know, what are the creative opportunities to reduce it? Well, the most creative opportunity is to get the 420,000 out.
Right. That's kind of what we'll be talking through, right?
We lead with our massive reduction.
Yeah.
Were there other things? I don't know if you guys have had a chance to even look at this. If there were other things that we should say more clearly or better.
Just reading through. I think the one about the teachers is going to get a lot of airtime, because there's kind of 2 teacher proposals, right? There's the 5, and then there's the 12.
Right. And the 12 we haven't really even addressed, apart from saying that that's where SR3 is going. And
yeah, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking through that. I think the answer to the question that he asked that you have on the screen there is fine. I think that makes sense. The only other thing that maybe we could add, which I think I know is in the budget book, Kate, but maybe we add to it just where those teachers would be. So the Wentworth and middle school, I think.
mm-hmm.
Actually, I think the teachers are going to be at every level except for the high school.
The original 5 was going to be middle school in Wentworth, though, right?
Yeah.
The 12 is really across the district to satisfy those class size limits.
Oh yeah. So we should. So in the 5, if we're still thinking Wentworth in middle school, then we identify that there. And then I think there was another question about the 12.
Yeah, if we go to the questions that were asked this morning. Oh no, wait. Here's John's last question was about the 12 teachers. Are they temporary?
Yeah. And
then the new questions, there was some overlap here. Is the intent to convert all 5 of the teachers using SR2 funds? Oh, they got it right. At least I think. I don't know. I'm not sure I understand that question. Do you think they mean, are we going to then need to fund them in the following year from operating?
Yeah, and I think this is where there's a lot of these questions, and quite frankly, I have the same question. You know, we're paying for potentially 17 positions out of grant money. are those roles that we're going to just hire people for a year? If so, that presents some I would imagine, trying to get people knowing that they're being funded by a grant for only a year. And if not, if we anticipate that we're going to need them long term, then that's a significant sort of level services budget ask, right, for next year.
So the first 5 were really based on enrollment and not necessarily tied into class size, as a result of the pandemic. Kate, am I remembering that correctly?
I think that, the ask on the part of the leadership team was, let's try not to go all the way back to 24 in a class
Right.
in year one. When we're just bringing kids back and we're just getting kids back up to speed and staff back up to speed. But I still felt like that was I'm sure that if you ask the K5, K8 principals, would they like more teachers? Of course. But I felt like it was more of a response to a transition year than it was, these are the class sizes that we'll have forever. And maybe I read that wrong. Maybe that was just wishful thinking on my part. The extra 12 are absolutely related to COVID because you can only fit a certain number of kids in a classroom, not because that's the ideal class size.
Yeah, because when we conducted the space analysis, that's where we generated those 12 positions. The 5 wasn't built into that space analysis. That's why I am suggesting that those are different situations.
That makes sense. So if we just take the 12 for a second, do we anticipate challenges actually hiring for those roles, knowing that they could potentially just be a one-year position?
I think that's hard to know, right? And I think we've talked about wanting to get out early to hire for those positions. I think that if the space allocations don't change at the state level, then we will be looking for more teachers along with every other district in the state. I think that's just a reality.
Yeah, and not only will every district in the state be looking for teachers, but they'll also be spending more COVID money than Scarborough has, because there are districts out there that are getting multi-million-dollar allocations. So, Sarah, I think I'm not so sure that hiring for a one-year position is as much of a black mark as the competition will be.
Okay.
We've had plenty of folks where we've put out a job for a year because we've had someone on a leave of absence, or even long-term subs, they'll take the job because it's a good way to get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
What you're not likely to get is someone with a lot of tenure in another district, because they might not uproot themselves from a good situation where they have seniority to do something for 1 year. But there are also plenty of folks who are still looking for a new position. I think that, again, I think it's not going to be so much that it's for 1 year as that there's going to be a lot of job openings.
I have another question on that. I don't know, Katie, if you do, or Leanne. Leanne, I think you're there. I can't see you, but it looks like you're on. Maybe not. Katie, do you have any questions on that?
My only other question on that are, if we hire these 12 new teachers, are we factoring into the budget any other costs that come with setting up 12 new
That's a
classrooms?
really good point. Yeah, this is my latest list. We actually started a brainstorm last week on exactly that topic. We've got quite a lot of furnishings in place. We figured out that we're probably pretty good on tech equipment because we have a lot of spares of the things that we bought during with the CARES money. We will have to get some things, some not necessarily instructional supplies for the kids, because remember, it's the same kids. They're just going to be spread out into smaller groups. But for the teachers, we'll definitely need some, teacher texts and curriculum materials and supplies of that sort. But one of the things that we want to try to do, hit the ground running now that everybody's back from break, is to buy some of that with some of the money we've held back in the current fiscal year. Because each department, each building has held back some on their instructional supplies in this environment. And so we have some funding available, we think, to cover some of those costs. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just the human being. You've got to have a place for them to sit and a place for them to, and a book for them to use and a laptop and all of that good fun stuff.
And are we displacing any other programming that's going to need to be, like, is the library going to have to be used at a building to, like, is that going to affect any costs? Are we there yet, or are we still?
We are going to have some staff that will be on carts. But again, I think that's part of the give to get as we focus on making sure that we can have our students back 5 days a week. So although, it would be great if every staff member could have their own dedicated space, we feel like that's a give to get, and that the goal of having our students return is more of a priority than making sure that everyone can have their own space.
Yep. But are there going to be any costs incurred from that? Like, or is that like an easy thing to?
I think the only cost that will incur will be carts for those teachers who travel, right? Like when you
yeah.
cart, you have to have a cart to have all your supplies on. And so that is on the list that we generated.
Maybe a pair of walking shoes we can invest in.
Like rollerblades, right? Yeah, and actually, it's in some places that will be a continuation of the way we've been doing business this year. We bought a whole bunch of carts, and we had the goal in some buildings that the kids would stay put and not, pass to the different areas where they would normally have specials or allied arts or whatever label you want to put on the non-core curriculum. So this is kind of a continuation of that, but yes, we have to displace you. And yes, you're going to be traveling around the school going to the kids, and they're going to stay in the space that's dedicated for them. But we'll have to get some more carts, but we already do have some. Actually, it's one of the CARES Act things we bought.
Cool.
Great. My only question on that is so the 12 roles pretty much takes up, I think there was some fast math you did, Kate, that basically worked backwards from the number that we were for the ESSER 3 grant money that we're getting, to say that would roughly account for 12 teachers.
Yes. 12. Yeah.
12 roles, maybe not all teachers. If the 3 feet mandate is lifted, do we have ideas or thoughts now on how we would utilize that funding, if not for all the positions?
The good news is we have a longer timeline to expend these ESSER 3 funds, right? So if we think about when we got our first CRF allocation, it was like, hurry up and decide in the next 3 weeks how you're going to expend all of this money. And it was kind of crazy, right? And actually a little bit stressful to make sure that the decisions, were being made thoughtfully, which I think that we did. But the good news about this is I believe we have until 2023 to spend these ESSER 3 funds. And so we know that next year is not going to look like a typical year, because we're going to be, really working on addressing some of the gaps in learning that have happened, working on SEL, which, was part of our plan prior to COVID anyway. But the great news is that we're going to be able to have time to thoughtfully craft a plan for the use of those funds.
think the other piece that we want to throw into that thought is that we've kind of set aside a whole nother topic of conversation, which is what happens when the world opens up again, the economy opens up again, people are buying homes, people are moving around. What happens to Scarborough's enrollment picture? Because remember, we had that huge growth prediction, particularly at the K2, K5 level, and that got pulled back because obviously things changed. But if we sort of circle back around after this coming year and we start to build in terms of enrollment again, we haven't really planned for that because we thought, we thought maybe ESSER 3 money would be something that would help us if all of a sudden in December we had, many families moving in and we started to have larger class sizes. I'm hopeful that we won't have to face that challenge until 2023, but Diane's right. Then, if we have ESSER money remaining, we would be able to put it towards something like that to at least have another transition year. And it's always a challenge with grant funding, right? If it's something that you honestly need in the long term, then it's probably not a great candidate for grant funding unless you're getting that grant year over year over year.
Yeah. Okay. I think I have another question on that, but Leanne is just messaging that she can't unmute hers. Oh, Diane. Oh, and she just went just as good. Let's see if she comes back in and we'll promote her again because I think she had some questions.
So to this, these additional questions that are on the list, I know, Kristen, you were going to maybe get in and work on the building committee ask question. And then I think some of these are probably pretty simple to ask, so we can fluff them up a little bit. Anybody who wants to contribute, I'll go and get in there and answer what I know. But I think we should probably, I was going to say, let's go back to the agenda, but maybe we should wait and see what Leanne has to ask and if it's about this.
I think she's back. Leanne, are you back and you want to ask?
I'm okay, you guys. Keep going. Sorry.
Okay.
We're glad you can talk. Do we have any data yet on kindergarten enrollment? Like, have you started seeing, because there could potentially be a big spike in kindergarten this coming fall, right? If everyone who held their kid back decides to send them in September.
Yeah, our current kindergarten numbers match our actual enrollment this year, right now.
This year's, okay. But that's grow, right? That's just going to get, we're already at our current year's enrollment.
Yes.
I think
for example, right now,
closer to during the summer though, right, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, we would still expect that there may be more students registering, but like right now at Blue Point, for example, we have 72 students pre-registered. At Eight Corners, we have 65, and at Pleasant Hill, we have 48. And so that is comparable to our actual enrollment this year.
My only other just comment on the 12 roles, and I don't think this is needed for Wednesday night, but just maybe a good tool to have is just a blurb or brief on what those roles, we anticipate those roles being. And I know that it may change, but I think Diane, you said earlier that it would be shared across all phase levels. So just some sort of indication of how those will be, what those roles will be.
I was thinking that would probably be the next update to the board in terms of school reopening, right? Or part of that would be, the last board meeting, it was, hey, we've done this work around space and now we've got a really cool idea to move forward. And then the next would be to get a little bit more into the details of what that would look like and, what we would be doing at each phase. So I think that would be a natural progression. And of course, there's budget implications, but there's also, people want to know what school's going to look like too, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely I think the right forum for it rather than in the finance committee.
Yeah, no, and the week before break, we, Sandy and Todd and I, went and met with every building principal at their school so that we could really dig into that space allocation and, do a walk around as needed, look at other spaces that we could utilize, et cetera. So,
Okay. Awesome, thanks.
Mhm.
All right, so you want to just talk through the plan for Wednesday night then, in the remaining time?
Yeah, are there other things that we want to call out for them, for the finance committee? I just made note of the things that they kind of asked for as grounding information for their thoughts.
Yeah, Kate, do you mind just scrolling down a little bit? The bottom is just cut off, thank you. I'm thinking, and Katie and Leanne, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, but I think we can cover it just using existing material rather than, like you said, Kate, creating anything else. And just give maybe a quick summary of the budget as presented at first reading, and then almost take them through that doc. I think that you just took us through that Excel spreadsheet to say, like, here's where we started, here's where there's been movement, up, down, around, and where we got to. And then after that, we can talk through sort of the impacts. I don't know what you had planned to cover for the budget cut impacts, but I'm wondering if we even need to cover that, or if we just kind of present what we have and then open it up to them for questions.
Yeah, I think that when I wrote that, I think what I was thinking about, it was following on listening to some of their meetings and their planning for the process. And I think the budget cut impacts bullet there is really, what have we experienced this year because of the budget cuts that were made in last year's process? And I think that goes to some of the questions, well, at least one or two of the questions that were asked of us of, if you deferred this, what impact does that have? And if you continue to defer it, what impact does it have? So I almost, in that for me, I think takes us to the restoration conversation, because the things that we're asking to restore in FY22 are the things that really were problematic for us in this current year.
Yeah.
The losses that turned out to be a bad choice or a tough choice.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if we can just include the impact as part of the narrative of why we need to restore them, rather than sort of a separate agenda item. So in the restoration, what we're asking to get back,
Mm-hmm.
explain why there was an impact to not having that this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that when we originally did the very first budget presentations, we did something like that. Like, here's the restoration and here's why. And I think we've started just sort of say, I think we got away from the explanation of it, but we can circle back and do the explanation of it right there. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So maybe like one or two slides at the beginning that just say like, Kate, I can go through the old presentations and try and pull out. It may even be just the slides that we did for the public hearing. Which
I thought about that, and then I
summarized pretty succinct view.
There's actually, if you look in that document, if you look in that slideshow, there's the original one that had more slides. If you go back to an older version, and it had a little bit more meat to it, and then we kind of streamlined it because we're like, yeah, said that.
Yeah.
So we could even dig into the older version if we felt like we needed more. But yeah, I think that'd be a good starting point.
Okay.
And I would like to make the assumption that folks have at least looked at the materials we've provided so far. So we don't want to take them all the way back to things they've already seen.
Okay. So why don't I do this? Kate, I can go through that document and then kind of maybe share with you guys the recommendation for where we should, how we should build that deck for Wednesday night. And then add anything to it, whether it's a link to the worksheet, or if you want to do a screenshot, however you want to do that, Kate. And then I think we should screenshot the questions and the answers from that spreadsheet as well, and just go through those. And we can send this to them in advance so that it may be that they don't want us to spend the time going through those answers, but at least they're in there and we can refer to them.
So we would link them into the slide deck, or would we share those back in another way? Because I know Colette also wants to have the Q&A stuff back.
Yeah, I guess follow her lead, whatever she prefers, but then link it or screenshot it as well into our presentation.
Got it.
Leanne and KT, any other thoughts or recommendations for Wednesday night?
No, I think I'm good. It looked as though, just the other question is, it looked from the order, we're third on the list, I guess. For the presentation, should we be in at 5 or 4? Thoughts on that?
I will confirm with John when I call him.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that's a good point. Like at what point do they want us to climb into the meeting? And the other note I threw out on the agenda was, do we have any desire, now that the council's moving everything out a week, to extend our second reading? And that's not a question we have to answer today, but our second reading is currently scheduled for May 20. And the council second reading will be on the, oh no, ours is scheduled for the 6th, and the 20th was supposed to be our fixing after town council changes.
Mm-hmm.
So the 6th is going to be awfully early. They won't even have gotten to debt service until now the 19th.
Yeah,
Not that we wouldn't have to make adjustments later anyway, but maybe we have to think about how our process fits in.
The referendum's on the 15th now.
Yes.
yeah. I see that April's on. I'm assuming that she's listening. And maybe April and Sandy, that's one that you guys can take away and see if there's a better slot for it in our current school board meeting schedule.
Yeah, the normal meetings for us in May would be the 6th and the 20th. And the 6th is next week. So
it does seem a little early.
Suddenly that seems like really soon, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I mean, we will have had a chance to sit with Finance Committee, which is good, and we'll have had a chance to, see where they're at, but we won't have I don't think a whole lot of solid direction from them by the 6th. We would have to just kind of do what we can do and then make adjustments after.
Yeah, it might be a cleaner process to try and move it to the 20th if we can do that, April and Sandy, without sort of complicating anything else that needs to be covered or making it a crazy long meeting. Because the other thing we could do is just have like a special meeting for a second reading some other time. I assume.
I put it in my notes, Sarah, and Sandy and I can definitely talk about it as we talk about the meeting for the 6th and the meeting for the 20th. But I mean, I'll definitely take my cue from you guys that it sounds like, the 6th just doesn't really even make sense at this point. So.
Okay. Thanks, April.
No problem.
At the very least, April, if we did our second reading on the 20th, the Town Council Finance Committee would have a public meeting the day before talking about what adjustments they were going to make and recommend to the council. So at least we'd have their direction.
Yeah, that makes much more sense, for sure.
Cool. So just in terms of presenting, Sandy and Kate, are you guys comfortable with taking the lead? And then April, Kristen, and Leanne and I can be there to support and help with answering questions.
I think that's fine. Yeah. And if you want me to I'm assuming that our slide deck, whatever it looks like, will be pretty familiar to me. So
Awesome.
I could kick it off with the description of where we are and what we've been doing, and then I think it turns into more of a conversation, hopefully.
Cool, and if we do move, we have a meeting booked in the calendar for Thursday. I think the goal of that was for us to make adjustments following Wednesday night's meeting prior to our second reading. If we do move the second reading, we may not need that, or we could at least push it out. I don't think we're gonna, well, I suspect we're not gonna get any direction from them on Wednesday night. It's gonna be more of a information gathering session, so we might want to push that meeting out.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think, with their timeline being extended, they might not feel quite as pressed to be drawing conclusions yet. And, good for them not to take time to process the information that they're getting. So you're right, we might not get a whole lot of hints about what's next.
When is their public hearing going to be now?
We had it for the first reading, didn't they? Yeah.
They haven't, I don't think they've had their public hearing. I have it on my calendar as supposed to be the 5th after our joint finance meeting, but I'm assuming it's moved.
Oh, I was thinking of, never mind, I was thinking
That's
of,
right. Yeah, it's supposed to be the same night as the workshop. I have the
it's on that graphic.
yeah,
I
it is May 5th.
it into their memory, and then I can't even remember it myself.
It's May 5th. Of course you memorized that. And Kristen's right. That's the night that we're supposed to have the workshop, and then at the business meeting is the public hearing. And they haven't changed that. That's still on Allison's graphic that we used the other night, which I am actually looking at. I have not memorized it. I'm sorry. I have 2 screens. I am cheating.
All right.
Can we confirm that they're not going to move those? Because I think from our communications perspective,
Right.
sort of get that lined up.
Yeah, let me, I'll add it to my list of things to talk to John about. Cool. All right, we have 2 minutes left, and I did just want to leave a couple minutes for public comment. I see that we have a couple people in attendance, so So if there is anybody in attendance who would like to make a public comment, the same rules apply as our traditional board meetings. So please keep it under 3 minutes. And I see that Winnie Lee does have her hand up. So I think I can promote you. All right, Winnie, you should be able to just unmute yourself. And we should be able to hear you. Winnie, we can't hear you if you're speaking. Sorry, Winnie, we still can't hear you. Looks like you're unmute now if you want to try speaking. Diane, did I do something wrong? No? Okay.
Looks like she is unmuted, so I'm not sure why we're not able to hear her.
Winnie, we're not able to hear you, but if you want to send an email to myself or to the whole board, I'll make sure that, if it's, put into the record and everyone sees it. Sorry.
Sarah?
Oh, there we go. Gotcha. At the last second.
Sorry, Sarah. I didn't raise my hand. I was just listening on, but thank you, though. I don't know what happened.
Okay. No worries. Okay, cool. Then with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.